Hello everyone, this is Dino Martins joining you from the Impala Research Center here in northern Kenya. And I've got with me Anchal, our Princeton in Africa fellow today, and Bara, the Impala mascot. And we're going to be talking to you this evening about a number of different things, conservation and biology, but I'm an entomologist, I study insects. And I'd like to start off by very much thanking explore.org for hosting us on this live chat, and Explore and Annenberg for their support towards the Impala Live cameras.
So Dino, let's start off with a few basic questions. Could you introduce yourself and tell our viewers more about your role at the Impala Research Center and what Impala does?
So Impala is a wonderful place in the middle of Laikipia County, which is north of Mount Kenya. It's a mixture of rolling savanna and bush. It's home to many different animals that you can see on the Impala Live cameras. But Impala is actually a research center. It's a place where people come to study and learn about the different animals, plants, insects, birds, fish, all the different things about this ecosystem. Impala's been in existence for about 20 years, and it's a really fun place to work. I'm very lucky to work and live here. I'm the executive director of Impala. And Impala attracts students from all over the world, from East Africa, from the United States, from Europe, from further afield as well.
So Dino, why did you become an entomologist?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I've always been interested in insects. My earliest memories are actually of insects, and I just as a kid we never had a television at home when I was growing up. So after school, I would watch insects and I would play with them and look at them. And I've just kept doing that basically. Insects are very important because they basically run the world. If we think of all the different processes here at Impala, from the soil to the pollination of plants to the dispersal of seeds to so many other things happening in the ecosystem, insects are an essential component of this. They're also very much overlooked. So we have, of all the known species on the planet, there are over 1.9 million species that have been described. And of those, over 1 million, in fact almost 1.2 million, are insects.
So of all these insects, which are your favorites and why?
Oh, that's a hard question. I like all insects, even the ones that bite and sting us sometimes. But if I think about some that migrates here, it's one of the world's most long-distance migrants. It travels all the way from India to the Maldives, from there to the Seychelles, and from the Seychelles to East Africa. And this is a tiny insect. It's only about 3 inches long, and it flies across the Indian Ocean. A 20,000 kilometer trip to come all the way to East Africa.
And conversely, what, in your opinion, is the most dangerous insect in Kenya?
Oh, well, there are a lot of insects that have evolved bites and stings and ways of defending themselves. So probably the most dangerous insects here are some of the wasps. They can sting, and they're extremely painful stings. They're not aggressive. They don't go out of their way to attack people. We do have a few swarms of bees around, as you've seen from the last couple of weeks. All the trees have been flowering, and that's attracted a lot of bees. And all the bees think, well, this might be a nice place to live, so they start building their hives inside our houses, and we've had to, gently encourage them to leave. There's an insect here at the moment called the Nairobi Eye, which many people are terrified of. It's a tiny little beetle, tiny, minute, sort of red and black and blue. And it secretes a toxin. It's one of the most toxic substances known on the planet. And Pederin is the substance, and if you get even a tiny amount on your skin, you end up breaking out in huge blisters, and it takes weeks and months sometimes to heal.
So I know that you've done a lot of work on pollinators in Kenya. Could you describe some of that work and talk about how threatened they are in Kenya right now and what strategies are being used to protect them?
Okay. So pollinators are a group of insects and a few other creatures, but mostly insects, particularly bees, who are essential for the survival not just of people and our food systems, but many other species as well. So in humans, we estimate that 1 in 3 bites of food is thanks to a pollinator, whereas in many other species at Impala, things like even elephants and camels, they all eat trees and seeds and fruits and grasses, and a number of these plant species themselves depend on pollinators. So a lot of the work I've been doing with pollinators has involved working with small-scale farmers who grow crops to improve their yields by managing their farms in a more sustainable way, but also in ways to increase good biodiversity. So planting other wildflower species around the crops, planting things that both attract pollinators and repel pests, managing pesticides carefully, putting up nesting sites for bees, including both hives for honeybees as well as bee hotels for solitary bees. So those are the sorts of things we've been doing. I also work with a number of schools and a number of other institutions where we basically try to improve understanding and awareness about the diversity of pollinators. For example, here at Impala, there are over 200 different kinds of bees, and all of those are important pollinators.
That's really cool. So someone has asked us about what a dung beetle is, and I'm excited about that question because they're one of my favorite insects. And how do dung beetles affect the ecology of Impala?
So dung beetles are also one of my favorite insects, and they're really special insects because their life cycle is very similar to many things that more advanced animals as such do. They involve elaborate courtship, parental care, laying up eggs and looking after their larvae, and eventually, hatching out and collecting dung. So at Impala, we have over 40 different species of dung beetles. And East Africa is the center of diversity of dung beetles in the whole world. And the reason for that is we have lots of dung from lots of different animals. And dung beetles here play an essential role in that they are out there cleaning up the dung and have evolved and adapted to feed on it and breed in the dung. So they collect dung, and the most famous ones are the ones that roll a ball of dung. And we can see them often along the road rolling their ball of dung, looking for a place to bury it. And if you see them rolling that, you'll often see just one beetle. Sometimes you'll see one beetle rolling, pushing the ball of dung with another one sitting on it. So what happens is the male dung beetle rolls a ball, and he uses it as a nuptial ball, a courtship, a gift for a female who, if she accepts it, comes and rides on the ball. They go off together into this burrow. They'll feed on it. Eventually, they'll go and get another ball. This will be a food ball, and eventually a brood ball, where they'll lay their eggs, and then both parents will spend the rest of their lives inside that burrow, caring for that ball of dung with the larvae inside it. So unlike most insects who lay hundreds or thousands of eggs and simply abandon them to their fate, the dung beetles do what we do. They look after their young. They spend a lot of time, effort, and energy caring for them, and that is a wonderful thing. And without dung beetles, we would have a lot of problems with things like biting flies, which breed in dung. And so the more dung beetles that are present, the healthier the ecosystem, because they remove the dung, which prevents the breeding of these biting flies. And also in the process of burying dung, something the dung beetles do is disperse seeds. And so that's a really important aspect as well of the ecology at Impala.
So that's really fascinating. One of our viewers writes in, do insects have a brain, heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys?
That's a great question. So insects, yes, they do have the equivalent of the brain, heart, liver, lungs, and kidneys, but they're not exactly the same. So they can do the same physiological processes, but they do them in a slightly different way. So in most insects, the brain is actually distributed throughout the body in a series of nerve centers. So there is a brain in the head, but that's why some insects can lose their head but continue walking around and functioning and doing a few things. Insects breathe through spiracles, which are little holes in the sides of their body that connect to tubes. And the tubes are distributed through the body, and they breathe by moving air through that. Now, we breathe through our nose and mouth into our lungs, and then the lungs, it goes into the oxygen dissolves and goes into our bloodstream and gets carried around the body. In insects, they take air directly into the spiracles and move it around their body. So they do have a nervous system. Insects can feel pain, they can sense heat and cold, they can react to the environment in often very sophisticated ways. And so they're, even for an animal that's really tiny, you look at a honeybee, for example, and honeybees and humans are the only two species on the planet that have evolved what we call referential communication. And one individual honeybee, for example, can tell another honeybee where food is located using a language through a dance. And only bees and humans have this ability to give instructions, directions. Chimps and many other species are very clever, but they cannot tell another individual where to go specifically to locate food. They could go together and show them, but honeybees and humans. And that shows you that insects can communicate and are biologically very sophisticated.
So, stepping away from insects for a bit, are bats efficient pollinators?
Yes, bats are very efficient pollinators, and many different trees are specialized to be pollinated by bats. Bats fly at night, and the trees that are pollinated by bats have their flowers opening up at night, and they have certain kind of fruity smells that attract bats because bats like sweet things. And we have in East Africa a tree called the baobab, which is a big, beautiful tree that occurs on the savanna, and that's one of the important species that's pollinated by bats. Yeah.
One of our viewers from the United States says, here in the States, bees are suffering due to hybrid seeds in the field. How are the hybrid seeds for farmers affecting your bees?
That's a very important question, in that, as in agriculture, which in many cases depends on pollinators, sometimes farmers could do things that impact pollinators. So on the whole in Kenya, we don't have a problem with pollinators and pollination because we have a lot of diversity in our farming systems. We do have an issue with pesticides, and some of the seeds are coated with pesticides that, even though they're in very tiny amounts, when the seed grows, it becomes a systemic poison and enters the nectar and pollen, and then it can affect the bee or any other pollinator. But on the whole, so far, at least in Kenya, most farmers have a diversity of bees on their farm and are doing quite well. And I'll give you one example. There's a mango farmer that I work with. I love mangoes, they're delicious. And on this mango farmer's farm in Western Kenya, we have found over 1,000 pollinator species. And it's not a very big farm, it's a fairly tiny farm.
So, let's talk a bit more about Impala and how we live with wildlife sustainably at Impala. How is this practiced, and what is Impala's philosophy in conservation?
So Impala's mission is focused on conservation, research, education, and community. And Impala is located in a part of the world where most of the traditional people in this area make their living from livestock. from keeping animals and milking them and selling them for meat or eating them. And these include goats and sheep and cattle and camels. And Impala itself has herds of livestock that we use for ourselves and we also sell. One of the big problems when you have livestock and you share a landscape with predators is that things like lions and leopards and cheetahs and hyenas eat this livestock and then are now in conflict with communities. So Impala has really pioneered work on predator-proof bomas. These bomas are an enclosure that at night the livestock can sleep in and be safe from lions. Also, a lot of work has been done on collaring lions here by Lawrence Frank and his colleagues. And they've put those collars on lions so we can track the individual lions and use that information to plan the movements of livestock to avoid conflict. And a lot of our work is also focused on community education and more broadly public education and awareness. For example, we have on the Impala Live website, there's a whole section dedicated as a curriculum to educational activities around conservation and sustainable interactions with wildlife.
On that note, could you talk a little more about Impala's role in the local community?
That's a good point. We do many different things with the community: education and conservation. We have programs in healthcare, and one that's happening right now that Anchal has been involved in is the Laikipia rabies vaccine campaign. And I believe in just a few weeks we've already vaccinated how many animals?
So more than 2,800.
2,800. That's incredible.
And that's over 4 weekends.
4 weekends.
In 9 communities.
In 9 different communities. So rabies is a disease, a virus, that is a very serious problem for livestock, for people, and for wildlife in this part of the world. So vaccination is a very safe, effective, and efficient technology that we've developed as humans to solve some of these viral diseases. And by vaccinating domestic dogs, we can actually almost completely eradicate the dog-mediated rabies. So that's just an example of one project that's been supported by a wide range of partners and donors and the communities. And the fantastic thing is, since we started it, this is the 2nd year. Last year we did about 2,000 animals. This year we've already done over 2,000 and we'll probably get up to 4,000, which means our coverage is getting more broad. And the more effective we are at controlling it in dogs, this means that wildlife, including lions and leopards and African wild dogs and cheetah and other endangered species, are also protected because the dogs are the main group of animals moving that around. So that's just one example of a very effective community project where Impala takes science and works with communities to find solutions.
On a different note, what are some of the major challenges facing Impala and the protection of its wildlife? How do we protect our endangered species like elephants and rabies?
That's a very good question. So one of the roles Impala has is to really serve as a leader in terms of generating knowledge that can be useful to conservation. So basic research is really, really important, whether it's in animal behavior or it's in ecology or it's on a single species like the elephant or the Grevy's zebra. But one of the big challenges we face is really getting the message out to enough people, not just in Kenya, but across the world, so that people can make good decisions with good information and use that to support wildlife conservation. More locally, we face a lot of challenges in that Impala has 2 rivers running on its boundaries. And these rivers provide water for all of the livestock, all of the people, and all of the wildlife. So we have all got to share that water, and there's not very much of it. So as the climate changes, the glaciers on Mount Kenya disappear, the rainfall patterns are changing, we have less water, But the other issue is as we take water away for agriculture in other areas, that makes a big challenge because elephants need a lot of water to drink. So one of the ways we overcome that challenge is we're building dams and we're restoring habitats and we're working with our neighbors to create watering points that are specifically for wildlife and separate ones for livestock and people so there isn't conflict over water at those locations.
Back into the world of insects for
Yeah.
now. One of our viewers asks, what are the best pollinator insects?
Oh, that's a great question. The best pollinators are without a doubt the bees. And of all the insect pollinators out there, bees are really, really efficient and effective. And the reason for that is they carry pollen on their bodies. One, they've got hairy bodies. So the pollen both sticks to their bodies and they collect it because they're taking some of it back to their nests. Two, bees depend entirely on flowers for their food. So they are seeking out nectar and pollen, and that makes them very frequent and reliable visitors. The third amazing thing about bees, especially at Impala, is that they like hot, dry areas. And Impala is quite a warm, dry place, and that's where the bees are most diverse. And so those three things make bees the best pollinators, and we're very, very lucky to have them.
So another viewer writes, what is the most abundant insect in your country?
The most abundant insect, that's a tricky one because there are some insects that are very abundant. So we have insects like ants. Even right now, there are ants crawling around on the floor and even crawling on us. There's an ant called the big-headed ant who's been spreading across Impala and other areas. It's an invasive species. Ants are extremely abundant. You're never more than a few inches away from an ant throughout your whole life when you're at Impala and elsewhere. So ants are really important. Termites are another group of insects that are very widespread. Probably there's a few of them feeding inside the wooden chairs while we're sitting here and in these structures outside. They live in the soil. There's uncountable numbers of them. And seasonally, some things like flies, even mosquitoes, butterflies migrate through Impala. There's a species called the brown-veined white that breeds here, and when it breeds in large numbers, the trees that it feeds on are completely leafless because there's so many caterpillars feeding on the leaves. And if you go up to one of those trees, you can hear the rain of caterpillar droppings falling on the ground as if it's raining because there are so many of them feeding so rapidly on the trees.
So one of our new viewers writes, do you have to use a flea protection product for your cute dog in Africa like I do for my toy poodle in California?
So Barabara is most of the time I don't need to use a product on Barabara. I'm very careful, but occasionally I do, and it's more against ticks than fleas. Fleas are not such a big problem here, but ticks are because they do carry a few diseases, and we don't want Barabara to get sick. So we use sometimes use a tick thing. We also have to control ticks on our livestock, and that's some of the research that we've done very effectively at Impala is understanding how can we improve management. And a key discovery that the group working on ticks have made is that most of the ticks don't carry diseases. They're actually quite harmless. And so we only need to use the medicine on livestock or on our pets when the actual ticks that carry diseases are around. So identifying the ticks is really important.
So one of our viewers writes, how do I pursue a career in wildlife conservation? And I'm going to add in there, do you have any advice for budding entomologists or anyone interested in studying insects?
That's a great question. And absolutely, we need as many people as possible to pursue careers in wildlife and ecology because our world faces so many challenges that the more people we get involved in understanding nature, and generating knowledge, the better off we'll be because we can come up with solutions. So the first thing you can do to pursue a career in wildlife conservation is get together with people who have similar interests. Join one of your local nature societies. Talk to your teachers if you have a wildlife club or a nature club. Uh, Join a local chapter of your Audubon Society or other organizations. Log on to Impala Live, follow the camera, provide feedback, share information on social media, get engaged in whichever way you can, go to events, participate, when there are global marches for rhinos, for elephants, for other species, get involved, but also think about how can you bring creative ways to doing this work, because that's really what we need. We need people in many different fields to come together and help us come up with solutions. In terms of being an entomologist, anybody can be an entomologist, and everyone should become an entomologist, in my opinion. Uh, Start by just watching insects. Spend 5 minutes a day if you can, just watching an insect, and you'll realize it will be life changing because they are doing such amazing things and they offer us insights not just into the world but into ourselves as well. And once you've done that, you can again join a local society, learn about insects, visit some of the websites that have a lot of information, go to your local museum, find out about who's studying insects in that region, start taking photographs of them, making notes about their behavior, because even in areas where people might have studied insects, because there's so many and so many different kinds, we don't know that much about them. So that any insect you look at, you're probably going to see things that nobody else on the planet, 7.5 billion people, has actually seen before. So there's a huge opportunity there to learn new things and make discoveries.
So, on a different note, do animals at Impala get environmental allergies?
On the whole here, we haven't seen a problem with environmental allergies. We do occasionally have outbreaks of certain biting insects. So there are times of year, especially after the rains, that certain biting flies or mosquitoes or midges appear, and then you'll see animals. You'll see, in particular, camels get bitten. Young camels get bitten in their ears. The cattle, the young calves get bitten. Even Barabara, the little dog, was getting bitten earlier this year on his ears. But because the rains here are very short, the flies were only around for a short period of time. But one of the things we are trying to sort out is more and more of these species are appearing due to climate change. And that's our big environmental challenge, because the climate is changing and new species of vectors and pests and other insects are appearing that we've never seen before, and they're having a big impact on certain species like rhinos, which are very endangered but are also very vulnerable to some of these new vectors or vectors that are changing their range.
So, another of our viewers writes in, when non-human primates groom each other, are they actually getting insects off their bodies?
Sometimes. Most of the grooming is ceremonial, especially in baboons and a few other social primates. But they'll be removing ticks, they'll be removing fleas, because baboons in particular, who spend a lot of time grooming, and you can sometimes see that on the camera, both the vervet monkeys and baboons will be grooming each other. They are removing tiny flies or ticks or fleas that are landing on them, and because they're moving through the grass, they will start picking these up, and so it's important for them to groom and remove them. Yeah. Birds and many other species do grooming as well.
Are there any cheetahs or East African hunting dogs in the Impala area? How many roughly?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. The cheetah is a magnificent animal. It's an animal that occurred all the way from Asia into North Africa and all through Africa. Today, cheetahs are only found in two parts of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa and a few are left in part of the Middle East. And in Kenya today, cheetahs are very endangered. We think there's less than 900 cheetah left in the country. This is in contrast with lions, where there's about 2,000 lions. So cheetah are one of the species that's studied at Impala. There's a group who've put collars on them. They're tracking them. They're seeing where do they feed, how do they move around. It seems that where lions are very abundant, the cheetahs don't do as well, because the lions and hyenas will attack cheetahs, but they'll also steal their prey. So it's really important that we understand these dynamics. And the cheetah is a beautiful animal that we want to study more and conserve, because there are so few of them left. We also have African wild dogs, or East African hunting dogs, or painted wolves, as some people call them, at Impala, and they're doing really well. Some years ago, they were almost extinct, and thanks to the work of scientists like Rosie Woodruff of the Zoological Society of London, the communities and the ranchers and everyone here has come to love the wild dog and protect them, and no one attacks them anymore and shoots them, because they realize that the wild dogs really do not prey on livestock very much. They mostly eat wildlife, dik-diks and impalas and other antelopes. And wild dogs are doing incredibly well. They live in amazing family groups, and we've been very lucky over the last few weeks to see them all over Impala. And the family group consists of a pack, but only the alpha male and female, the top two individuals, breed, whereas the rest all go along and they cooperate and help each other in hunting and feeding and looking for places to rest and caring for the puppies.
So, what is your favorite species, insect or otherwise, on Impala, and why?
Apart from the dragonflies, who are really remarkable migrants coming to Impala, one of my favorite insects that's around at the moment is the praying mantis. And that's because they're very patient, and we often find them sitting out on flowers. There's one species in particular called the flower mantis. And this is a remarkable insect, because at first you would think it's a flower. It's got this amazingly ornate, decorated body with beautiful projections and colors all over its body. But it sits on a flower and it just waits very patiently for another insect to come and then grabs it and eats it. And so the flower mantis is a really, really remarkable insect that we have here at the moment. Another favorite insect is a damselfly. And this is probably one of the most beautiful insects in the world. It's called the dancing jewel. And sometimes if you're watching the Impala live camera, and if it's looking down at the water, at the edge of the water, you may be able to see the damselflies and dragonflies. But this damselfly in particular can only survive where the river ecosystem is healthy. So you need the hippos, and you need the fish, and you need the water to be flowing and to be filled with the right kind of nutrients from the hippos and their dung, all the other microorganisms, the algae, all of this diversity contribute to a healthy site where this amazingly beautiful damselfly, the dancing jewel, can then survive. It also needs water that's very rich in oxygen, so it's not polluted. And so having a clean, healthy stream is really important for the damselfly, who's the dancing jewel, who's called the dancing jewel because what they do is when males are courting, they'll get together and they're covered in the most bright iridescent colors with white legs and red on the outside, turquoise blue abdomen, beautiful coloring on their body, and they'll fly towards each other and shake their legs in the air. And if you're watching this in the sun, it's probably one of the most dramatic, colorful things you will ever see in nature.
So for our camera viewers,
Yeah.
could you talk a little about what insects they should look out for on the camera?
On the camera.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of insects around the camera. So first of all, the hippos are the stars of the camera. And why do the hippos spend so much time in the water? Well, they're large and they're trying to stay cool and they've adapted to living there. But you'll notice if you watch the hippos on the cam, every so often they flick their ears and they submerge their head underwater and then they come back up. And one of the things they're doing is avoiding the attention of this creature called the hippo fly, who bites their ears and bites their nostrils if it gets a chance. And so hippos spend a lot of time avoiding the hippo fly. That's one of the reasons they hide in the water, is to be safe from these biting flies. And that's an amazing insect. To think that a tiny insect can cause a big animal so much bother and make it change its entire behavior and spend as much time as it can hiding in the water. Another common insect at the camera are the different kinds of butterflies. The brown-veined white is a species that you'll sometimes see migrating in the camera. You'll see thousands upon thousands of butterflies flying by. And we would actually love to do a citizen science project around that. So I'm hoping that in future viewers of the camera can help us do science to count the butterflies. Because we've estimated in another migration that was near here that there were over 33 trillion butterflies moving during that time. So we would love to get more information about the butterflies. You can see when things are flowering around the camera, ants moving around after the rains. We've got bees and wasps visiting flowers. Lots of different beetles sometimes can be seen. We have the dragonflies who, because it's by the river, are there almost every day as well.
What animal or insect from your region is the most endangered?
That's a good question. So in terms of endangered animals, broadly speaking, we have things like the Rabies zebra, which is probably the most endangered species that's on Impala right now. It's this beautiful, beautiful zebra. Has big ears, Mickey Mouse ears, very fine stripes. It's much taller and more elegant than the common or plain zebra. And there's only 2,350 left in the world. And the reason we know this is because scientists at Impala, Professor Dan Rubenstein from Princeton, and other scientists worked out a way of making software that would read the barcode of the unique pattern of the zebra stripes, and they sent out a whole bunch of citizen scientists. About 400 people went out taking pictures, thousands and thousands of pictures of these zebras across all of this part of Kenya. And we found there's only 2,350 left. And most of those, more than half the population, are actually on Impala and Old Jogi and a few of the other ranches and conservancies around here. So that's one highly endangered species here. Another one is the cheetah, of which there are very few. We don't actually know how many because they're very shy and it's hard to track them. But there are a few out there. The African wild dog. In terms of insects, not many of them are endangered. They're usually quite abundant. There are a few butterflies. And there's some butterflies with extremely unusual ways of surviving. For example, there's one species here that is a carnivorous butterfly. So while most butterflies, caterpillars, eat plants, this butterfly, its caterpillars live in an ant's nest in one of the acacias and feed on the ants and get fed by the ants as well. It tricks them, it drugs them, and does all kinds of strange things in there. So those species are quite rare. On the northern part of Impala, we have several mountains, and right at the tops of these mountains are different kinds of trees. And on those trees are parasitic plants, mistletoes. And on the mistletoes, seasonally, are some very rare butterflies as well. And they're tiny butterflies, but when you look at them closely, they are amongst the most spectacularly colorful, intense blue. They look like jewels, with sapphire and ruby and other iridescent colors in their wings.
So here's another question that speaks to our discussion of human-wildlife conflict and how we manage that. I read about bees being used to keep elephants away from farms. How effective is this with human-wildlife conflict?
It's a very effective way of keeping elephants out of farms. And why would you want to keep elephants out of farms? Is because if you're a farmer and you just have a small piece of land and you're growing a crop, and along comes an elephant which can eat 250, 300 pounds of vegetation a day, that elephant could clean up your farm very quickly and you would be very unhappy. So, keeping elephants away from farmers is really important. Small scale farms can use beehives as a very effective tool, and this has been developed by Lucy King, who works in Savo and other parts of East Africa to promote beekeeping and sets up fences around farms using beehives. It works in areas where the farms are small. If the farms are much larger, you have to combine it with other methods. But here at Impala, we use beehives to protect individual trees because we've got a few old trees and our numbers of elephants are quite high and we don't want to lose all our big trees to elephants knocking them down. So we have beehives in some of the big trees, and then the elephants, they do go there, but because they can sense the bees, they don't try and push the tree over.
All right, so Dino, for anyone who'd love to know more about the work you do and about insects, could you tell our viewers about some books you've written and other articles?
Okay. Yeah, so you can go to the Impala Live website and we'll share some of the links on there. We have a book on pollinators that's free for download. It's been downloaded over 5,000 times from the website, which the link should go up shortly. This can be, it's for East Africa, but it applies to many different parts of the world. We also have books that I've written on insects that are available, that have been printed. There's a book on the insects of East Africa. There's also a book that just came out on the butterflies of East Africa, and both books have been very well received. I'm very happy that people are excited about them and about insects. The other thing they can do is, post comments on the social media at the website. We will be developing the educational and curriculum material soon to include insects. At the moment, it's mostly birds, reptiles, mammals, and amphibians, but we will add insects to that soon as well.
Yeah. Here's another question from a viewer who's interested in disease vectors. So, what other insects besides mosquitoes can be carriers of diseases that might be of concern?
So, many insects, because they've been around for a long time and they've evolved relationships with many different species, viruses, worms, bacteria, and protozoans and other things can serve as vectors. So what's a vector? A vector is a vehicle. So the insect itself or the tick or other species does not necessarily cause the disease just by its bite, but it serves as a vehicle to transmit the disease, usually from one infected animal or human to another one who's uninfected. So mosquitoes are the most famous and the most important vectors. At Impala, we're lucky we don't have as many mosquito-borne diseases, but we do have a lot of mosquitoes. The most important vectors here are not an insect, but a closely related group, the ticks. And ticks spread a number of different diseases. We have a disease called East Coast fever, which is a disease of cattle and is a big challenge for people who keep cattle and need them to survive. So that's a big problem, and we're doing some research to understand what is the distribution of this tick, how can you better manage your landscape to reduce the number of ticks. And one of the things we found is where there's healthy grassland and healthy wildlife populations, there are actually lower levels of ticks than where it's overgrazed and there's just livestock. So that's a big discovery that's coming out of Impala. So that's one group of important vectors here. The other group of vectors we do have are flies. We still don't fully understand the diseases that they might be transmitting, but it does look like they're responsible for some of the eye diseases, both in livestock and in humans as well.
All right. Finally, Dino, could you tell us a bit about the joys and challenges of your fieldwork? What's the, a day in the life of an entomologist like?
So a day in the life of an entomologist, it starts very early in the morning because I have to get up and there might be something interesting out there that I need to look at. If it involves going to the field, we usually try and get out. So when the sun's coming up, it depends on what we're studying, but it involves a lot of patience. So you really, some animals, you spend a lot of time driving around looking for them. Well, with insects, we often go to one place and sit down and wait and watch carefully because I'm really interested in studying their behavior, in their interactions and how they're doing things and manipulating each other. So it all depends on what we're doing. For example, right now we have a project breeding butterflies. So we've got to make sure the caterpillars get food, that we clean out the breeding containers, we see if any of them have pupated. If they have, we move them into the flight cage because if they hatch out, we want them to mate and to lay eggs. So there's a mixture of things you do as an entomologist here, from catching insects using a net, looking at them under the microscope, to observing their behavior. Are they feeding on camels? Are they doing other things? So, yeah. So it all depends on what we're studying.
Dino, I think we'll wind down now, and thank you so much for your time, for answering our viewers' questions. And could you end by telling our new viewers about Impala Live, what we do on our social outreach?
So Impala Live is this amazing platform online where you can share in this amazing part of the world every day. And there's the website Impala Live. We'll share the link. And there's a live cam. You can watch all these different animals and insects and birds and many other things going on. There's educational material on the website. There's a curriculum. And it's a great way to be engaged, not just with seeing what's happening in the bush, but also learning about biology, learning about biodiversity, learning about conservation, and you become part of a community of people who are sharing in that joy and in that adventure every day. And in the near future, we're going to be having several citizen science projects on the cameras where you can become a biologist, you can be a scientist, you can help us understand hippos, understand flies, understand other things going on that you're watching live, streaming from the bush here in